So with a little bit of knowledge about how traits are different within a population, like different colors of hair, different colors of skin, different colors of whatever, you can actually have these traits move around, since like we talked about our beetle jumping from the burnt up lawn to the nice green lawn, stuff can just move. So when you have two populations, so for example in step 1 we got 2 islands. We got some red bugs and some black bugs. On the left island, maybe the red is the most dominant and it's very fit. On the right, maybe black is most dominant. Maybe it just happens that they both were red and black and neither one is more fit, it's just different. Because they were separated by water, they kind of transition differently. So something happens and you have a drought and it exposes a land bridge in step 2. The red bugs can now get to the right side. And now you might have some red bugs scattered within your black bugs. When you have a trait go from one population to another and not arise from a random mutation, like one of the black bugs didn't have a random red child, it moved from the red population. So this is called gene flow. You're flowing these genetics to another spot. Now you can also have something called genetic drift. Step 1, we have 6 reds, 2 blues. We'll say they're bugs again just for the sake of, I don't want to think of another animal. Step 2, a random fire. Now the key is this. The key is random. It has to be random because it's not going to necessarily say, okay, fire affects reds more than blues. That's different. That's not random. That's almost natural selection. Something having a little bit of a more powerful trait to resist something. Fire is fire. It burns them up. It kills 3 of them. So now our ratio is 3 reds to 2 blues. Since it was a random event, like a random fire, it didn't really say, oh, well, obviously, since the reds went down compared to the blues ratio, I mean, no blues died. Are they immune to fire? No. The red is not even less fit to fire. It was completely random, but it did change the ratio of the traits in the new population. This is called genetic drift. It's drifting towards one way or the other, but it was completely random and it wasn't because something was stronger or weaker. So now we have natural selection. Nature chooses the traits that are more likely to survive because nature just wants you to not die, procreate, and have lots of babies. That's what nature's big idea is. So as nature is choosing and naturally selecting stuff, saying this is better, this is worse, and it slowly kind of changes stuff, over time you can become so different that you no longer resemble the thing that you both came from. Evolution is when you change so much from a trait, from being more fit, less fit, all kinds of different things, and eventually you become so different from one another that you are a different species and you may not even be able to interbreed anymore. So evolution initially was Charles Darwin. So over time, Darwin has started, and then we have kind of added into what's called the evidences of evolution. This is basically saying evolution, while we as a scientific community accept that yes, it is a thing, there are a lot of evidences that we say, okay, I can point to this one thing to show you that evolution truly did happen. So, evidences of evolution. Number 1 is fossil record, 2 is biogeography, 3 is anatomical, 4 is molecular, and 5 is developmental. First one's really easy, fossil record. You look in these layers of rock, and the further down you go, it's older and older layers of rock, and you can actually see what the environment was like, but you can also trace organisms over millions of years, and you can see how they progress because you have a layer of rock really deep where you have some kind of aquatic plants, and then in a layer above it that's like a million years later, you have different plants, but they have some similarities. And you have a big drought, dry up, like you can see these things are actually walking around, some kind of little rodents or rats or something. The water went away, and then water came back from maybe a big flood, shifting of plates, all kinds of different things. But the fossil record can actually show us what animals used to look like. We can look at their bones, look at their fossils, and then we can kind of see how they progressed just by kind of reading from bottom to top, almost like a book. And you see these gradual changes until you have a drastically different creature on top than you do on bottom. Next one is biogeography. So this is a really good example with like Madagascar. It's a little island right off Africa. You can have 2 rat species that are genetically similar enough to breed, and they want to breed, but they have some kind of geography separating them, and they can no longer get to one another. At one time, the whole Earth was one big mass. There was a big blob called Pangaea. There were all these supercontinents, but the most common one that everybody seems to know is Pangaea. If you had a creature die and become a fossil, and it was right on the line, right on the fault line, and then the continent spread apart, you would actually basically have some fossils for the same species on Africa, and then all the way across the ocean in like Central America and North America. So by looking at this and looking at biogeography and then combining fossil record, you figured, okay, there's no way this little rat species got from here to here. But we know that these plates separated. So not only is it evidence for plate tectonics and the fact that we used to be one big blob, but you can actually see the ancient ancestor that got separated by the split. So the rat on the left, okay, he can't breed with the female rat on the right. He might continue to evolve and naturally select traits on the left. The female on the right in Madagascar is going to select her own traits. This one rat species could actually diverge into two different species over time because they are now separated and they can no longer combine their DNA. So they kind of evolve on their own. Anatomical. This is probably my favorite one. So anatomical differences are good evidence for evolution. You have three types I want you to know. I want you to know homologous, analogous, and vestigial. Homologous, if you're looking at the prefix homo and hetero, homo means same, hetero means different. Homologous, you can look at a human, dog, bird, and whale. They are all animals. But you can actually see similarities in their bones if you look at the one that's highlighted in red, like on your forearm and then the bones down towards your hand. The bones are the same, they have just slowly kind of changed in shape through natural selection and evolution over time. Even though the dog is a different species than us completely, it's still a mammal, so it had to have evolved, according to Darwin's theory of evolution, from some ancient mammal. There had to be a first mammal that branched out into all the current mammals. Even birds. Whales are mammals also, but even birds are separate species, but they're similar enough to where you know, okay, mammals and birds also had to have had a common ancestor, so they must have evolved from something. So the SSDF is how you can remember this. This means they are going to have same structure, but a different function. The function of a human arm is grabbing stuff, I don't know, punching someone. A dog walks with that leg, a bird flies, a whale swims. This is a different function, but the structure is the same. Analogous is going to be kind of the flip-flop of that. You have a butterfly and a bat. They both have what? Wings. The thing with these wings is they are very different. The butterfly wing and the bat wing are very different. Analogous means different structure, like they're built differently, but they have the same function. Flight, that's the function. So if you look in the bat's wing, it actually has the same bones as mammals. They're just spread out almost like long fingers with these webbing in between it. It's not built like the wings of a dragonfly or a butterfly. And then finally is vestigial. So here's a poorly drawn picture of a whale. I'm sorry. Vestigial structures exist even in humans. This is when you had something that used to be fit. Remember, fitness means used to be good, used to help you survive. But then eventually you're like, well, we don't really need this. So over time, it changed to reduce either its size or its importance in the body. For example, look at human teeth. We aren't sharp anymore because we have developed tools, so we have kind of flat teeth. We've developed knives and forks and all kinds of stuff. In this picture, you have a whale. The whale has no legs, but inside it still has a pelvic bone. You see this a lot with stuff that evolved to no longer have arms or legs, like snakes. An example in human, if you've ever had appendicitis and have your appendix removed, at one point the appendix probably did something for digestion. It probably aided with some kind of enzyme or broke down something, but we've since evolved to not really need it, so it just kind of remains a pouch that can get infected. So we remove it and you're okay. That would be a vestigial structure for us. There's probably something else that the appendix was needed and it may have evolved into a completely different organ. So it was no longer needed, and slowly natural selection if you had a small appendix, nature didn't say, oh, this is bad, you're gonna probably die. It just didn't care. So over time, having a large appendix was less and less important, and it shrunk up. Molecular, this one's super easy. Now that we can actually track through DNA and track genetic code, we were able to look at molecular structure, which basically are nucleotides and our nitrogen bases, and look at all that, and notice that we have very similar DNA to other mammals. The more similar your DNA, you are more related to that thing. If you compared us to an orangutan, our DNA would be much more in common than us and a squirrel. So we got our chimpanzee that we're like 96% in common with, or something like that. I mean, but we actually have 60% of the DNA in common with a banana. So all of the stuff that would like make up a banana, since it's a fruit, since it's a plant, a living thing, cells, cellular functions, they have a lot of the same organelles, the mitochondria stuff, and like all this stuff, the cell cycle, cell division, these are all things that a banana has in common. So its DNA is like 60% the same as ours. We are 60% banana, I guess, according to this. But the other 40% is what differentiates all the species from a fruit. If somebody ever asks you what is the most accurate or most, I guess, most important one, definitely molecular or chemical similarities is the most important or most accurate evidence of evolution, by far. That is considered the gold standard if you're trying to say how related are these two things. Developmental, embryonic. So this one is also kind of cool. So the embryo is when we're developing. If you're breaking these up into columns, going from top to bottom is a different species. However, it's eerily similar. It's eerily similar how much the human all the way on the right looks like a fish all the way on the left at stage 1, right here. The embryo initially almost looks like just a weird larva, kind of like you'd see like a mosquito larva floating around in water. As it develops, all the DNA starts kicking in. Remember, we have a lot in common, so the initial build is probably very, very similar. And now they can actually differentiate between that first little thing and the final product, which is at the bottom. I mean, these all have spines, eye spots at the beginning. We even have gills. Look at that. You got gills initially. They kind of go away and eventually develop into just normal respiratory system and lungs and stuff for people. But this is a good evidence because there's no reason that we would all look like that at the beginning if we didn't evolve from something that had similar stuff like that. And this even points at a good evidence that we all came from some kind of aquatic environment first before anything. The fact that gills are one of the first things to pop up and then we're like, oh well, we've evolved past that, so get rid of them. That points directly to evolving from something that was very similar to a fish at one point. We share something in common at some point with all of these creatures, with the rabbit, calf, hawk, chick, tortoise, salamander, fish. We all have a common ancestor from them somewhere. It just, when we're looking at our tree of life and it branches up, it depends where the common ancestor is. Our common ancestor is more recent with a mammal than it is a fish. Remember, these are all evidences of evolution. There are still people that argue that evolution isn't a thing, and you have all kinds of debates. The scientific community as a whole accepts that this is evolution. I mean, we can actually see it happening on a yearly basis because evolution speed is determined by reproductive rate. So we have things like viruses or bacteria that can multiply millions of times in a day or so. We can see evolution kind of on a larger scale with the bacteria because we see generations, we see millions of generations happening. Humans, it takes a little bit longer to see, but you can see some natural selection even comparing trends from a long time ago. Humans have gotten a little bit taller, our lifespan has improved. I think we're up to like 78 for males, 82 for females, something like that. So something is happening even since like the 1600s when the average, I don't know, what was the life rate? What was the life expectancy in 1600s? 40? Something? I don't know. They got married at like 10 just because they didn't have a lot of time. They just figured stuff out. Evolution's entire job through the mechanism of natural selection, it just wants you to not die and have babies that will also not die. Very, very simple. That is its main goal. That's its main focus. And if it can do that, nature feels that you have a pretty good shot at keeping everything going.